Thank you all for coming to our 17th or 18th annual Isaac Asimov Memorial Panel Debate. For all previous years we've been doing this, we have focused on the universe, astrophysics, my particular specialty. This will be the first year where we break that mold. And it's a mold that really shouldn't have been there in the first place because in memory of Isaac Asimov, who wrote on practically every possible science there was, even branches of science that were not yet invented, like robotics. And so this year, our topic will be biologically based, a topic for which this institution is uniquely qualified to not only have experts, but find experts across the land. Tonight's topic is de-extinction. Oh my gosh. De-extinction. Bring you up to speed on a few things. This event was founded back when we opened the Rose Center for Earth and Space, and it was on monies generated by friends and family of Isaac Asimov in his memory. He had died in the early 1990s. I had not known that much of the research that went into his 600 books that he had written was conducted in our research libraries here at this institution. So he was a friend of the institution, we were a friend of his, and this is the living memorial to him. Not only that, I just thought I'd give you just a couple of astrophysics updates. In a few months, just while I have you, later this summer in August, specifically August 21st, there will be a total solar eclipse. These are not as rare as any press would have you believe, because practically every total solar eclipse, there's a newspaper article that begins, "Rare eclipse occurs." The total solar eclipses are about every 2.5 years somewhere on Earth. No one says, "Rare Olympics coming up," "Rare presidential election." So if you see someone say "rare eclipse," just, they haven't taken Astronomy 101. So the reason why I'm mentioning this eclipse is that the moon shadow landfalls in Oregon will cross the entire continental United States, leave the United States, enter the Atlantic Ocean, and the only land it would have touched would have been America. So it's America's eclipse, and nobody else's. And we live in an era where people can travel. The last time the United States had a good eclipse, travel was much less common, either by car or by plane. So we expect no fewer than 100 million people to bear witness to this. If you want to get hotel rooms in the eclipse path, it's too late. So just letting you know. So let us begin. This is a debate, but not in any formal sense. We're just going to have a conversation as though you are eavesdropping on a discussion that we are having at a bar. That's how we've constructed the Isaac Asimov panel debates. We have a mixture of expertise that has strong overlap and strong diversity of worldview on this subject. So let me first bring out for you a friend and colleague from here at the museum, Ross MacPhee. Ross, come on out.
You know,
Ross is curator of Mammalogy here at the museum. Of course, that makes him an expert in mammals. Next, we will go to George Church. George Church is professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School. George.
Thanks,
man. Come on out. Up in Boston, Massachusetts. Next, Greg Kaebnick. Greg, welcome. All right. He's a research scholar at the Hastings Center. His background is in moral philosophy. So we're going to hit that a little later. Yeah, okay. Moral philosophy. It's not whether you can do it, it's whether you should do it. Yes. Next, we have Beth Shapiro. Beth, come on out. Beth is professor of paleogenomics at University of Santa Cruz, University of California at Santa Cruz, and She actually wrote a book on how to, how to
Clone.
clone. Yeah, okay. Yeah, how to clone a mammoth. We'll get more on that a little later. We'll ask her if she's already done that.
Right.
In her basement. Just checking. And last we have Hank Greely. Hank, come on out.
That's for real.
So Hank is a professor of law at Stanford University. Oh, you keep going, yeah. A professor of law at Stanford University, and he directs the Center for Law and Bioethics.
Sciences.
Biosciences, thank you. Thank you. So, we'll first give like a 1-minute opening remark from each one of them, and then we'll go straight into the debate. So, Hank, tell us just why you're here.
You invited me.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm a law professor at Stanford. For the last 25 years, I've worked on ethical, legal, and social implications arising from advances in the biosciences, mainly genetics, but also neuroscience, assisted reproduction, stem cell research, and any other thing that strikes my fancy. And about 4 years ago, I got invited to have my fancy struck by De-Extinction, which I found a fascinating topic.
So how did you pick up the science along the way if you're fundamentally a law person?
A lot of reading, but mainly it was through the kindness of friends. It turns out that scientists will talk to you for a long time about what they love to do as long as you seem to nod at the right spot. So they don't think you're wasting their time.
But it's promising that we don't need to think of getting a degree as the end of what you continue to learn.
Yeah, my last bio class was in 10th grade, which was at least 15 years ago.
And what grade? And what grade did you get?
I got an A, thank you.
Nice, very nice. It's promising.
A positive.
Beth.
Yes, my background is in ancient DNA, paleogenomics. So for the last 20 years or so, I've been wandering around picking up bones and figuring out how to extract DNA from them. So as far as de-extinction is concerned, I'm kind of the logistics person. Like, can it actually happen, and what technologies do we need?
So you go back to the Ice Age and a little before, or do you go really deep in time?
With genetics, with DNA, the oldest DNA that's been recovered is 700,000 years old, around that old, and that's from a horse bone that we actually found frozen in the Arctic permafrost.
Okay, so your professional relationship to extinct animals goes as far back as you have data.
That's right.
Okay.
We can reconstruct data further back in time, computationally, but the oldest that we've been able to recover from bones themselves is about 700.
Okay, all right, thank you. Greg.
All right, so I'm the moral philosopher. I'm here to think about how the value questions raised by biotechnology square with various concerns that we might have. So I've done work over the last 15 years or so on questions ranging from, sort of at the simple end of things, benefits and costs, risk and uncertainty, and how you make decisions under conditions of uncertainty, precaution, and what that means. But the questions that have always most interested me, I think because they're hardest to articulate, hardest to get at, but also I think that they sort of underlie a lot of the public's reactions to this stuff, are questions about the human relationship to nature. And what that means, how we understand that, and how we want to stand in relation to the world as we find it.
We just want to control nature. That's the answer. Yeah, we got the answer to that question long ago. George.
Yeah, so I mostly develop technologies for reading and writing and interpreting your genomes, mostly medical, but occasionally those same technologies can be applied to ancient DNA and endangered species. So when we read the genome, you can learn what your risks are, actionable things you can do about your genome.
Risk, you mean health risks?
Health risks, yes. And when we write it, we can use it for gene therapy, or we can use it for making new agricultural species and so forth. We have a a project called the Personal Genome Project where you can participate in medical research.
Are you coming to solicit New Yorkers'
Yeah,
genes here?
all of you should join it. Yeah,
Okay.
we have one of the centers is here in New York.
All right, Ross.
I'm what's called a Pleistocene paleontologist, and that means that I work on things like what you see in front of you, some bones and tusks of a mammoth, and in undertaking that over the last 30 years, I've worked in many parts of the world. I've always been fascinated by extinction. We'll get to de-extinction, about which I have very mixed feelings. But the idea that species have been lost over time, the idea that humans, to some degree or other, have been complicit in many of these losses, makes it the sort of subject matter that really is important to talk about, especially going forward into our future, with in mind that perhaps tens of thousands of species are going to be lost in future. So what a paleontological perspective brings to this is a notion of what the world was like in the past, what we've lost, and maybe through de-extinction, what we might gain again.
Good. Very clean.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's our panel. Yeah. So, for the next hour, you'll be eavesdropping on our conversation that we're having at a bar. At the end, we will make time for questions, and there'll be a microphone in each aisle for you. So, Ross, what do we have here? This obviously the dodo bird, right?
That is a dodo.
Okay, and this is that's a jaw.
Jaw, arm bone, and some tusks of, these are casts, of a mammoth.
A mammoth,
from
and
North America. And then down at the end, everybody thinks this is a dog, right? Say yes. No, good. It's a thylacine. It's a marsupial.
I was going to say that, yeah.
He was going to say that. That became extinct finally in the 1930s.
And dodo went extinct when?
Well, we've had an argument, Beth and I, about this, but we would say the last quarter or so of the 17th century.
And the mammoth went extinct when?
About 10,000 years ago on the mainlands, both Eurasia and in North America, and lasted up until 3,000 plus years ago in some islands north of Siberia.
Did we render these three species extinct?
Well, this is a question.
Yeah, I
We
know it's a
certainly-
question. That's why I'm asking you. That's why I'm standing on your left shoulder. Okay?
There's an idea about
Because
human
I
evolvement.
first heard you use the phrase sixth extinction, and then I read all about it. And so is this part of that, what's going on?
Well, it is, because what people hear when they hear the word the words sixth extinction, it's sort of all prospective. This is what's going to happen in future. It's predictions. But there is a past tense to extinction, again, going back to the point whether humans were complicit or not, that goes back 50,000 years easily, and has to do with the spread of people across the planet. And in case after case, where humans are newly arrived in an environment where they haven't been previously resident, you find evidence of loss, and you find evidence of mega loss in many places, particularly islands. So what I want you to grasp from all of this is that the sixth extinction has a background.
Wait, just a sec. You said loss particularly on islands, so that's an isolated niche. So it's, presumably then it's more sensitive to changes that are brought to it. Is that why?
Well, perhaps so, but the real point is that it's when people come, the animals go.
Okay.
And that's a repeating phenomenon. Now, with regard to the dodo, it's up in the air whether humans actually hunted it. It's more likely that the dogs and the pigs and whatnot that people brought with them to this tiny island in the southwestern part of the Indian Ocean were eating their eggs. And for that reason, they died out. For mammoths, we don't know. Human hunting, of course, is a leading theory, but there was also climate change and possibly other arguments. With thylacines, we have something really interesting because there was a bounty on these animals that the Australian government instituted in the middle part of the 19th century. But the numbers didn't collapse until right at the start of the 20th century. And the question has always been, was it because of human persecution, or was there something else going on? A cofactor, perhaps one that humans were responsible for as well, but it's not just as easy as saying humans did it.
So George, you're in the business of understanding the genetic identity of life. Is that a fair way to characterize what you do?
That's part of it.
Yeah, so you look at the genetic code and you say, well, this is responsible for that property and this property and the other property. Might you one day be able to adjust genetic code to make it resistant to what might render it extinct in that moment? Will you have that much power in your lab? Will you admit to having that much power in your lab?
So this is already happening in agricultural settings where you'll make, say, plant species that are drought resistant, salt resistant for climate change, to adapt to climate change, and to make pest resistance a natural component of the
Wait, so you tell me the future of the world is not stopping climate change, it's making climate change resistant animals?
That would be a nice story, wouldn't it be? Yeah. No, I think we need a little of each, maybe, yeah.
Okay, so you are there. So Greg, you think about this and the consequences of it and why. Everything I've heard thus far, there's a problem, we may have solutions to it, so then why do we need you? I mean that with love.
Yeah. Well, love is actually really the key thing here. So when I think about the human relationship to nature, we have a variety of different ways that we can think of ourselves as standing in relationship to nature. We can be consumers of it. That's a kind of ideal. We can be protectors. We can be reinventors. We reinvent nature with synthetic biology. I tend to plunk for the protector ideal, but then we have to think about what that means. For me, at the bottom of it, and this is going to sound incredibly unscientific and unphilosophical, I kind of dopey, but I think that it's really it's about love of place and community you belong to, love of the world as we find it. This place that it's love of inheritance, love of things given. And so the question is, what does that mean? How do we go forward with that? I'm actually not a naysayer about this technology. I think the technology is very exciting, and my example for how it can be used in a simple way to protect things that are on the verge of going extinct has to do with the American chestnut, which is sort of functionally extinct out there, but you can tweak it. There are people in SUNY campuses that are figuring out how to render it capable of overcoming the blight that wiped it out. But I'm kind of worried about, I think that some of the examples of de-extinction are going to kind of take us off track if we're trying to protect this thing we love. And I worry about where it could eventually lead. There are cases of it that I'm totally fine with. I'm not against the technology, but I kind of worry about where it could eventually go.
So Beth has already thought this through, and she wrote a book. You can buy it in the back. Beth, does it teach all of us how to clone a mammoth?
Yes,
Okay.
it's a step-by-step manual, yes. If you buy the book, you can have a mammoth in
You
your
can have a mammoth in your backyard. So
garage.
in your garage, yeah.
Inside.
This is New York. We don't have garages.
Oh.
So
Big garage.
Rooftop.
Mammoths. That'll work. How is this idea received by your colleagues, or your more skeptical colleagues? First, is it really possible to clone a mammoth? You've got the good DNA to do this.
Right.
And do you really want to do this?
Right.
And why?
Okay, so that's about 7 questions. I'm just going to back
Wait,
up
let me
and
add
answer
an 8th one.
Okay.
The mammoth, we all associated with the Ice Age, right?
Right.
So you want to clone a mammoth and bring it back just in time for global warming. That's cruel. That's just cruel.
All right.
Okay.
So one of the arguments about why one might consider bringing a mammoth back to life is so that we can protect the world from rapid global warming. And I can get to that in a little bit, but I thought I would back up first and first say, can you clone a mammoth? Because the answer to that is no.
Right.
And you wrote a whole book on this.
It's a very short book.
Okay, if we have the genome, we don't know how to yet? George has not given us the toolkit yet?
George is not cloning a mammoth. in these,
No, but
in
he's
these
making
particular
tools that do this.
scientific words. So in order to clone something, the way that we think about cloning, and when we think about cloning, the thing that comes to mind, the animal that comes to mind, is Dolly the sheep, right? This is the first cloned animal. But we have Dolly the sheep because we had, to begin with, a living cell that we were able to take and turn into an embryonic stem cell, the kind of cell that can go on and become a whole animal, right? We can't do that with a mammoth because there are no remaining living cells. When we go out into the field and we collect mammoths, we end up with bones that we can extract DNA from, but that DNA is in terrible condition. The fragments of DNA are chopped up into base pairs, little base pairs of like 30 to 40 bases long. If I extracted DNA from my hair or from a cheek swab from the inside of my mouth, I could get millions of bases long strands of DNA. That's not what we get.
So we can clone you.
We can clone me. We might not want to, but we could.
But I've seen shows, so it must have been real, where a mammoth came out of the glacier.
Right.
Dead mammoth in the Ice Age fell in some crevasse. The crevasse filled up, and everybody forgot about it. And then this glacier, during global warming, melts, and out pops a mammoth, which I would think would have intact DNA. You're telling me no.
Key word, dead mammoth. If it's dead, it's not going to have any intact DNA. As soon as an organism dies, any organism, the DNA in every one of those cells starts getting chopped up. First because we have enzymes in our own bodies that are going to chop up that DNA, and then because of bacteria and plant DNA and fungal DNA that get into that and just catabolize it, break it down into tinier and tinier fragments.
What you're telling me is that Jurassic Park was just BS. That's what you're saying.
For many more reasons than because...
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Hank, is this, what, you're the lawyer here.
I'm not licensed in this jurisdiction.
All the
can't-
better.
I-
You can say anything you want.
I can't help you.
Is there, what are the legal ramifications of this at all? Because when I think de-extinction, I'm not thinking law, I'm thinking philosophy and purpose and meaning. And you're making a whole career of this, so how's that plugging in?
Well, a very small part of maybe a very small career is being made out of this part, but there are legal issues everywhere. So for example, I think one of the toughest moral issues about de-extinction is animal welfare. How many maimed, deformed, stillborn, quasi-mammoth, quasi-elephants is it worth to bring back a sort of mammoth? There are actually laws in this country, the Animal Welfare Act, that deal with some of those issues. If you actually brought a mammoth back, would it be an endangered species? That may seem like a dumb question, but the law is full of dumb questions.
Wait, if you brought back one mammoth, yeah, I would say that would be an endangered species.
Well,
Would it be a species?
Would it be a species?
Oh, wouldn't be a species.
and also,
Wait. What do you mean? I have an animal standing in front of me, it's not a species?
It would be. It might not be a mammoth.
It's part elephant, right? So we can't clone it, so we're going to have to cut and paste our way from an elephant to a mammoth.
But so if you use some elephant DNA, add some mammoth DNA, and then you have something that's some mammalophant.
mammophant, I think.
Mammophant, excuse me. Okay, we got terminology already.
Yep.
Okay, if you're going to get a
We're on it.
mammophant, so why isn't that its own species?
We got problems defining species in biology.
Okay.
And we have even bigger problems with defining species in law, in part because the biologists and the philosophers don't give us a very good, clear answers. So not only do you have to decide
Blame
whether
it
this
on them.
mammophant is a species, you also, under the Endangered Species Act, have to determine what its natural range is. And
So that
whether
you'll even know
it's
how to protect that.
endangered in its natural range. So then you have to ask the Department of Interior and various other governmental bodies to call it endangered. The ranchers
we
will
still have a
probably be
Department of
opposed
Interior?
for several
checked
several
today's
more
list.
weeks.
Several more weeks. All right, Ross,
Yes.
you specialize in understanding extinction in a way that you want to prevent it. That's noble. Meanwhile, you have other people who are trying to bring species back. So where is your moral compass on this in terms, because there's a lot of brain power here thinking about species that have already been extinct when perhaps they could be thinking about how to protect species that are already at risk, and we know we're going to lose because we're in the house.
Right, but those are separate questions in my view. I'm going to start with what Hank just said about animal welfare, because for me, that is the outstanding question. It has nothing to do whether this first mammophant is its own species or what have you. It's an individual, and we have an obligation, the way I look at it, especially if we have created it in some fashion, to take care of that animal. And when does that responsibility end? By virtue of trying to bring back mammoths, or mimics at least of mammoth? Have we taken on a responsibility that has no endpoint to it? I would say yes, because what we're doing is playing God, and in that event, we have to look at it in the same way that we would look at obligations to any living thing. Now, do I object to what is being done by George, for example, who's trying very hard to find a way to create these hybrids? I don't in principle, because I think it's a fascinating sort of thing that we're going to learn a lot from. What I want to hear, however, at the end of the day, is that anything we do create has some expectation, that we have some expectation for it, that it will be kept in a way that we would want for any other natural species or set of natural organisms.
But Greg, there's talk about a zoo. I've heard about a zoo. So if you're going to make a whole new set of species, either resurrected from extinction or something out of George's lab, and now you create a habitat for it, because that's got to be part and parcel to its survival, maybe that habitat doesn't really exist in any comfortable way in any geographic spot on Earth, so you create a zoo. Morally, what does it mean to create an animal out of extinction, create an animal out of thin air, and then make it a zoo creature?
Well, I mean, to me, that doesn't count as de-extinction. Now, it might.
Because you want to roam free and be part of the environment.
Yeah, no, if you've just created it as a sort of tourist attraction, you haven't really accomplished what de-extinction, purportedly would accomplish. Now, you might want to create a zoo for the mammoth. This is one of the projects that George has been working on, because it might be part of some larger effort to actually change the environment. So there was actually an article that came out just a week or two ago in The Atlantic, I think, about Pleistocene Park, playing off Jurassic Park.
Pleistocene Park, so this would be Ice Age.
It's not really a classic zoo. It's much more like,
Right.
It's really,
much closer to the wild, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's
Large
closer to
animal
wild.
park.
It's
Yeah.
quixotic
It's
is what
fenced
it
in.
is.
Quixotic.
Yes.
Yeah,
Pleistocene
so
Park
the
is-
idea here, George can walk through this, but the idea is that,
Just remind me, Pleistocene contained which kinds of animals?
well,
All of these big animals that you're thinking about, mammoths.
yeah,
and
big
Okay.
Ice Age.
Bison.
All the ones that were in
Marathon.
the Ice Age movie. All of
Yeah.
those.
Except
Yes,
the dodo, which was somehow in the Ice Age movie, although they
Yeah, there was a dodo in the Ice Age movie.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
There's a
bad.
weasel also.
Yeah, it was-
What was his name again?
Gosh, it was a funny name.
I had a
Neil
cameo.
to something weasel,
I had a cameo in Ice Age 5.
which he's now regretting having told us about.
Yes, there were 4 other Ice Age movies first before that. So it's a Pleistocene. So Pleistocene Park. So these are the most recent sort of wave of extinct mammals.
Yeah.
You put them in the park.
But also things that are still alive.
Right.
There are horses and bison and lots of species of deer.
That were around in what we call the Pleistocene and are still there
The
here today.
Pleistocene was over 10,000 years ago. You're talking about the most recent ice ages. There are lots of animals that were alive then that we know of today.
Right.
Including
Muskox
humans.
and- Including
Yes.
humans.
Yeah.
I mean, really what's happening here is de-extinction and a kind of geoengineering are sort of getting mixed up together here. Pleistocene Park is the real rationale for it, as I understand it, is to try to figure out a way of bringing back grasslands in the north, so that the you'd have these mega herbivores knocking the snow down and allowing the winter freeze to really freeze deeply, and you could then lock in methane that is abundant.
Is this simply because they're stomping around?
Yeah, they're stomping around and pushing the snow aside to get at the grass, and
Lots of manure.
But it's the snow that's important, because snow is a very efficient insulator.
Yeah.
And the temperature, that Arctic permafrost, is an average of the annual ambient temperature. And if you have the snow, it traps that summer heat. Whereas if you get rid of it, with animals digging through it to look for something to eat, then that cold winter air can hit that soil and bring down the temperature.
Can I say a few words on
and this has been
Pleistocene
done
Park in this regard?
experimentally.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's been well enough defined here for the audience, unless you read The Atlantic. This is the idea that you can, to some degree, not prevent global warming, but tamp it down, because it's actually the northern part of the northern hemisphere, which incarcerates something like 1,600 billion tons of carbon, whether as carbon dioxide or in other forms like methane. And the idea is that as the planet warms, this material is going to be released and sort of work along with what humans are doing to really make the greenhouse gas problem a runaway event.
And just to remind people, because carbon dioxide as a gas, its name has the word carbon in it, but methane, though carbon isn't in its name, it also has carbon. So
And it's
much more potent greenhouse gas.
28 times more
Right.
potent.
But here is the issue. It is a wonderful idea, but I called it quixotic because it relies on the interpretation that we can somehow turn the cycle backward, that we can go back to something that we lost. And what did we lose? We lost this idea of the mammoth steppe, this grassland that stretched all the way from Western Europe across the northern part of Eurasia down into Alaska and Yukon in North America. A huge, huge biome. But what happened at the end of the Pleistocene, 10,000 years ago, was a very marked change in the climate of the far north, such that the dominant plants at the time, which were not grasses, but forbs, which are non-graminoids, not grass species, herbaceous plants, started to go into decline. And what replaced them was not anything that these animals can eat. What you've got in the far north now is wet tundra that is largely dominated by mosses, like sphagnum moss. And you've got these forests that are made up of birch and alder and larch and so forth, which are toxic to most herbivores, especially large herbivores of the sort that we're talking about. So in order to institute this plan that we're going to terraform the northern part of Eurasia, which is where the Pleistocene Park is at the moment, we have to visualize that we've got these animals that we've somehow adapted, which is something that George and Beth have both written about, to introduce genes that will permit them to live under these very cold conditions. But what's left out of the equation, as far as I'm concerned, is that there's nothing for them to eat at this point. And it will take centuries, if not millennia, before there's been enough terraforming so that the kinds of plants they can eat are there in abundance. Up until that time, they have to be provisioned. So that makes Pleistocene Park a very large zoo.
Ross, you're not thinking big enough here, because George in his lab can just create some digestive enzyme for your new mammothants that can eat the plants that the previous ones didn't eat. So what? He can do that in his lab in the future.
Is that so, George?
Yeah, I don't want to make any promises here. There certainly are animals that eat some of these things, and you can detoxify them in a variety of ways. It wouldn't be out of the question. You can also accelerate. I mean, I think the terraforming needs a great deal more study before we even have a chance at it. But there are components that could accelerate it.
So let me ask both of you this. There's what in the public people generally think of as the law of unintended consequences. Of course, it's not a law. It's just recognizing what is common when people don't think things through as much as they should. And that's kind of what Ross is saying here. So when you're creating new species and at some point you want to release them, have you really thought it through? Have you thought through its effect on the environment, the effect of the environment on it, what its effect it would be on bacteria, on parasites, on climate, everything in what seems to me to be a very complex equation? Because if you haven't, then you're dangerous.
I'm definitely dangerous.
Okay, you got that. Okay, that answers that. Hank, what?
So let me jump in on this, because this is where thinking about what kind of policies we should have is important, but also thinking about how this would really play out. And I think of de-extinction as at least a three-part process. One part is making a few individuals, then turning them into a captive breeding population of some sort, and then perhaps releasing them into a properly prepared environment. The advantage of thinking about it in three phases is you can use the first and second phase to do some of the research you need to figure out the questions that you properly raise. Are these going to be an environmental pest? Are they going to be kudzu? Are they going to be starlings, which started in Central Park? A Shakespeare enthusiast brought some starlings to North America where they had never existed, released them in Central Park, and there are millions of the pest birds now
You probably
all
hadn't
over.
thought through all those consequences before.
So
Starlings?
starlings, little black
Why do
birds.
I only see pigeons? So what?
They left Central Park. They went to the suburbs.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah, they moved to Scarsdale.
But you need a framework for thinking about what the consequences are. But if you phase out the process, do the process in phases, you could have that framework. We don't have that framework now. But I think before anybody gets very serious about this, we should. You shouldn't be able to release a de-extinct species into the wild unless somebody's looked at it and said, yeah, on balance, this doesn't look very dangerous. And one last point on that, that includes, if it does go wrong, how do we clean up the mess? You know, I'm not very worried about, it would make me sad, but locating and killing off rampaging mammoths, probably not that hard. If passenger pigeons got out in North America again, there were 3 billion of them. They live in the forest. Figuring out which is a passenger pigeon and which is a regular pigeon from a distance is going to be difficult.
To a New Yorker, they're all just pigeons. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And should be extinct, right? But
Well, we had no trouble killing the passenger pigeons the first time around.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah,
easy.
that's true.
Apparently.
But so thinking through what kind of structure, what kind of regulatory structure you want before you allow this is really important, and it hasn't happened.
Wait. Since when does regulatory structure precede the act? Isn't it always after the fact, once you know what it is you actually have to regulate?
Not always.
But
Often.
it kind of is now anyway. I mean, this question,
practice.
these questions are not unique to de-extinction.
Yes.
If we think about translocations of organisms or introducing species into different habitats, we've introduced plenty of species, invasive species, into
On
new
purpose and by
habitats,
accident.
both ways, and without thinking beforehand about how we're going to regulate them or how we're going to control
Though
them.
sometimes we actually have, and so the most interesting recent de-extinction, I think, a local/regional de-extinction, is wolves in Yellowstone. Wolves weren't extinct all over the world or all over North America, but they were sure as heck extinct in Yellowstone. And after lots of debate and discussion, wolves were brought back to Yellowstone. They have changed the ecosystem there, or at least their reappearance has correlated with significant changes in the ecosystem there. That's for Ross.
Well said.
In ways that many people think are good, but every time you do a reintroduction, bringing the California condor back to California, when it was reduced to captive populations, that required thought. And it's really not, I don't think it's different. We just don't have a good regulatory structure for dealing with de-extinction. Just
Where did
as
the
we don't for
California condor
exotics.
go?
It went to a bunch of pens. It went to a captive breeding facility.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was a decision that was made at some point to go and get the remaining individuals from the wild and bring them into this captive facility so that they could try to make as many outbred individuals. as
Okay, so
possible.
Beth, I have a question. There's this talk of you need enough of these de-extinctified individuals to...
I hate that word.
I don't, it's all new vocabulary to me, my apologies. You need enough of them to have what you call a breeding colony.
Right.
But if you can just create them, why do they have to breed? If George in the future can just pump them out, oh, you need another mammoth, a female mammoth, here. And then, 3 weeks later, out walks a mammoth. They don't even have to breed. You just manufacture them.
Well, despite what you might hear in the news, it takes longer than 3 weeks to make an elephant.
Gestation period of 22 months.
Yeah, to start
Think
with,
about that.
There's that.
George can fix that.
But I think just tweak a few genes. Yeah.
And
new solution for
Poison-resistant
everything.
in the Sistine
instant
Chapel,
elephant.
in the Sistine Chapel,
As a serious answer to that question.
yes, thank
Whoa.
you. Okay, sorry.
As a serious answer, I think the motivation of this is not to create a population that's somehow going to be sustained just by continued lab work and spending money, but to create a population that's capable of surviving on its own in a native and natural habitat. And this is part of why it's so hard. I mean, we can't think that we're just going to make this one elephant mammoth hybrid and release it and it's going to save the world, but we need decades of making multiple individuals. Fortunately, we're not talking about creating an identical individual, because George's work, for example, it's been to swap out, I think 50 genes or so far. I don't know how many you've done.
Yes.
But the rest of the genome is still variable. It's still the elephant genome that you started with. So there will be natural diversity in these populations, except for where it matters, which is where mammoths and elephants are distinct from each other.
Ross, you're trying to put in a plan to protect species that might be at risk. But suppose we decide, as a culture, there's certain species we would just as soon have extinct, simply because...
Flies.
Well, I think we've
Mosquitoes.
tamped down flies compared with 100 years ago. What I'm thinking specifically is consider the guinea worm, which President Carter is working to completely remove from the human population, and humans are their only host. So therefore, it's a terrible scourge where it still is in the few cases that remain. The point is, this is an act of purposely rendering a life form on Earth extinct. Should we, can we, is this the right thing in this moving frontier of there are animals that go extinct because we did not plan it that way, but if we know we don't want something because it's hurting us, is that so wrong? And take it down to the smallpox virus, to the H1N1?
That's a flu. That's
The
an
flu
influenza.
virus. The flu
But
virus.
smallpox is a great example.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the flu virus is a great example because just this week it was announced that you could take a particular flu called H7N9, which is a bird flu, and change one letter in its genetic code, and it becomes infective in humans. So when you're thinking about what you want to suppress and get rid of, a very important part of the new synthetic biology is to what degree are those governments or individuals who have malevolent interests going to mess around with this kind of technology so that you weaponize it.
And the weaponization of moving frontier of science and technology has been what humans have been doing ever since we've been warring tribes.
And we've learned very little in the interim, yes.
Yeah. What?
So,
Hank?
weaponization. Nice example. Nobody's going to build a whole bunch of mammoths and use them as war elephants. But
Wait. In Star Wars, there was something that looked like...
Yeah.
I thought I remember.
It would
We
be
can
hard to keep
resurrect
secret.
Hannibal while we're at it, yeah.
So why
But-
don't we ask the question why we're talking about mammoths and other very large beasts? You know, if you take a look at the mammals that have disappeared in the last 500 years, over 50% of them were rodents, another 20% were bats. How many of those would you like to have de-extincted? And why aren't we working on those? Because they don't have the charisma, they don't have the automatic interest.
They don't have a movie about them.
Nor do they
Yeah.
have that.
But to go back to the biowarfare side for a second, I mean, and I really do think this may be the most important thing I'm going to say. De-extinction, in a way, is a bit of a sideshow. It's a fascinating sideshow. But synthetic biology, genetic engineering, particularly through a new process that you've probably heard of called CRISPR, clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, so now you know why it's called CRISPR, allows us to modify the genomes of almost anything in ways that are 10 times faster, cheaper, more accurate, easier, etc. So if you want to change the world, you're not necessarily going to make mammoths, you're going to make smallpox. You're going to take horsepox or dogpox or monkeypox, turn it into smallpox and let it loose. If you're a gardener, I assume some of you in this audience who I can't see because of the lights are gardeners.
This is New York City.
Yeah,
Just
okay.
Rooftops.
Blue roses. There are no true blue roses. Somebody's going to use CRISPR to make blue roses.
I want more blue food.
Somebody
After
is going to
blueberries
use
and
CRISPR
blue
to
corn,
make blue
there's
food.
no blue.
Somebody's going to use CRISPR to make a unicorn. People are going. De-extinction is only one small piece of what the new power over biology is going to do.
Can you use CRISPR to make sheep that have wool in different colors? Then you don't have to dye the wool?
Probably. One thing that's already been done in China is to use CRISPR to make goats that have both more meat and longer hair for, is it mohair, angora, whatever it is that you get out of goats, goat hair. So they've modified the goats to make them more useful. And we're going to keep doing that. They modified pigs to get little tiny pigs. They intended them, they're not that tiny when they're adults, they're about the size of a Doberman. But they were intended as lab animals. They made too many of them, so they sold them as pets. This is doable today. It doesn't take millions of dollars. It doesn't take 10 postdocs. It takes a couple of people with bio backgrounds and a few $1,000s in a lab.
So, Greg, synthetic biology has powers that are being, the public, the press perhaps, is focusing on her clone mammoth and not on
George's clone mammoth.
George's, but
They're
not,
fighting over custody.
but not on the general power this gives us to solve problems. And you talk about weaponization, of course, in the tradition of what they used to call anti-tank warfare.
Yep.
You make the tank more violent, and then you invent something that can defeat what you just invented in case the enemy did that. And you just keep doing this. So if you have the power to create a smallpox virus with this tool, then presumably you have the power to create an antidote.
A vaccine.
A vaccine with the same tool. And isn't that how that would work?
Yes.
Okay.
But you'd hold the antidote, you'd hold the vaccine for your own side and not let the other side get it.
Sounds like you've already thought this through.
And I came sort of late to this biosecurity game. The Director of National Intelligence under the last administration announced back in, I think, November, December, that he thought genome editing was one of the 4 most important security issues facing the United States.
So, Greg, is there a morality to rendering species that we don't like extinct? And is there something kind of messed up, getting back to, was it George or Ross's point, that we kind of only want to bring back cute, fuzzy animals that look nice to us? Certainly not a bat, and certainly not a rodent.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I had to pick an animal to try this with, true de-extinction, it would probably be the gastric brooding frog. Only problem with that is, or one problem with that is that it would almost immediately go extinct again because it was wiped out, I think, by chytrid fungus and
Wait, this is the gastric breeding frog?
brooding.
Oh, brooding frog.
Yeah, it's a very...
No, why?
No one knows why, but it...
Why do you want to bring that back?
Because it's not so much that I want to bring it back, but I can see...
Because it broods its babies in its mouth.
Yeah, the stomach turns
cool.
into a uterus in the middle of its life. It's the only animal that changes one organ into another organ, I believe. And so it's this fascinating
This is just
case.
creepy. This is...
You should see the photos of the mother frog smiling and all the little baby
Burping.
frogs in her mouth.
Burping out babies.
Yep.
So it's a
So you would do this for entertainment. That's why you want... you're a moral philosopher, and you would do this just because it's kind of cool?
No, absolutely not. Most of the things that get talked about as de-extinction, I think flatly don't count. And the phrase "bring back" sends the hairs on the back of my neck on end. That cannot happen. It just logically cannot happen. A species is somehow a set of things, and once the set is depopulated, the set just doesn't exist anymore, and you can't sort of. The language of "bring back" implies that it's down in some netherworld and can be kind of walked back by George or another
So did we
biotechnological
bring
hero.
back the bison or not?
Well, the bison we brought back from the brink.
From the brink.
From
So what's the
brink.
difference?
So if you've got
Well, the lineage.
thousands of frozen mammoths that are a little over the brink, and you bring those back.
Well, I mean, if you could actually really, really recreate the species, but I don't think you can for all the reasons that Beth has walked through. in her
Yeah, I haven't
excellent book.
accepted Beth's comments.
Yeah,
by
well,
the-
you
by the
two,
way.
you can have it out.
I think we're arguing over semantics, though. I mean, I do think that once a species is gone, you can't bring that back. Any organism is a mixture of what our DNA codes and the environment in which we live. And we can't recreate that environment, so we're not going to be able to, even if we could change every single one of the 1.5 million differences between Asian elephants and mammoths and make something that is genetically identical to a mammoth, the thing that is born to an Asian elephant mom or inside a massive piece of cool
Lab.
yeah
Lab equipment.
yeah that is very cool technology.
But the next generation will be born from mammoths.
Right, but it still won't be the same thing. But my argument is that it doesn't matter. Because we're not doing this, as you say, because it's cool, or doing it because we have this fetishized vision of a world that has mammoths in it again. Those people like George, who genuinely think that this is something that we should do, are motivated by solving ecological problems,
Is that
by
true?
restoring interactions in a habitat that are no longer there.
What-
Maybe that's not true. I'm
What
speaking
did-
for
what-
you
Yeah,
here.
what drew you to it? What drew you to the project in the first place? Was it the geoengineering issue, or what? Or
No,
was it?
I think
was it
We're asking if you have any moral code at all, George.
I
If I may summarize their question.
I think I'm being painted into a funny corner. I actually published many papers on bioethics, so I'm in Greg's
I don't
camp.
mean. Yeah, I don't mean to paint
Yeah.
you into a corner.
But I think that the thing that drew me to it probably, aside from youthful enthusiasm for large extinct mammals, was the Asian elephant. I think it's going extinct, and it's a little less quixotic than trying to terraform, which I think is, even anything in the right direction is a good thing. But the Asian elephants are going extinct for two reasons. One is there's a herpes virus that's killing them off on weaning, and they're in close proximity and conflict with humans. So if you could extend their range even a little bit to one of the largest ecosystems in the world with the fewest number of people in it, that would be good for the Asian elephant. And the woolly mammoth is so close to the Asian elephant, they probably could breed successfully. Whether you have a mammoth or you have a fully recreate the mammoth genome, they're probably very close, because the Asian elephant and the African elephant, which are much further apart, have bred to produce babies, so that the two closer ones could.
So, George, I didn't know that. You're saying the Asian elephant, which we find in India typically, and the African elephant are farther apart genetically than the Asian elephant is from the mammoth?
That's correct, even though you might say they look more alike, but because the mammoth is radically changed to adapt to the cold, but it did it presumably in a fairly small number of mutational steps.
So let me ask a question that's a little heretical, all right? What brings me to this question is, having been a parent, there's a time where if you're a first parent, you're sterilizing everything, the bottles they drink from, and then while you're sterilizing all the bottles, you look over your shoulder, and your kid is licking the baseboards of the floor.
Yeah, very clean floor at
Right,
that
right.
point. Yeah.
So what are you doing, right? And you realize, so without humans, Earth has rendered, what's the number, high 90% of all species that have ever lived have
99%.
99% of all species that have ever lived have gone extinct.
Which means it's a natural phenomenon.
A natural phenomenon. And if extinction is natural, why are we becoming all boo-hoo over species that are, I'm being heretical here, that are on the brink of extinction, even if we caused it? Isn't that just our place on Earth? That we are going to survive, and that'll be at the cost of some other species, and that is nature. Is that a philosophical argument that anyone puts forth?
Well, sure, absolutely, yes. I mean, Aldo Leopold said something like, when the passenger pigeon went extinct, we mourned it, we humans mourned it, and that was the first. That was the first time that had ever happened in the Earth. So yeah, extinction is a natural process. A species that goes extinct through natural processes, I don't think that we have any reason to feel bad about. But
No
if we're
obligation.
the agents of it, if we're doing it, then you have this question of the degree of interference in the natural world.
But you know, there are a lot of things. Natural does not equal good.
Right.
So it's a natural
It
process.
is in many people's minds. They think, oh, nature
Well,
is
not,
good.
Not smallpox.
It is a natural process for our children to get sick and sometimes die.
Yep.
And that is
And
a
in a day,
natural
most kids.
process we should fight and do fight. You know, just because something that's natural doesn't mean it's good. Just because it's unnatural doesn't mean it's bad. We need to pick our fights. And I do think they're really good, important questions about what we should fight about and what we should pick them on.
Right.
I want
So-
to just...
Wait. So Greg, I got to get to this. If we look through history, we find out that things that were once considered the morally right thing to do in later generations would say, what the hell were you thinking? So where is the moral compass here? Does it evolve along with our technology or our sensibilities?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's morality is culture.
It's
part of
culture.
it, yes.
So where is it now? What is that compass pointing to now? Who on this panel is it pointing to or not?
No,
No,
I don't
sorry.
get the question. Who's right?
The question is,
Who will
to
we
what do we
pass-
have an obligation? That is the question.
Do we have a moral obligation to bring extinct species back?
Yes. Is there a moral obligation to bring species that we rendered extinct back?
No.
Is there a moral obligation to our health to render things extinct that would otherwise subtract from our health?
Yeah, probably. To the second question.
I think we're choosing in very pragmatic and economic ways. We brought back the bison from the brink because people could make arguments that they would make better burgers and steaks, low cholesterol.
So if you're going to bring back animals, make sure they're tasty, and that will assure
And
their
with-
survival forever.
and with-
Cows will never go extinct.
And so with rodents and goats and so forth, they're not popular in places like Galapagos because they're making other species extinct that we happen to like better. They're more beautiful, or they're tourist attractions, or what have you. So in Ecuador is intentionally removing them from the islands, maybe not making them extinct worldwide, but this is part of the reason that they're not popular for de-extinction.
So,
So
Greg,
it's
do you
a
factor...
case-by-case thing. I mean,
So, Greg, do you factor in the economic dimension of this? I just had a conversation yesterday about the cork trees, because the cork has some variability from bottle to bottle of wine that they use, and so that's bad. So they say, well, let's find something to replace the cork. And in so doing, for every bottle you drink that did not have a cork, that is fewer cork trees that will be harvested for their cork. And the cork trees are otherwise on land they would want to use for something else. So in fact, the demand for cork is sustaining the lives of cork trees. So in terms of bringing back a mammoth, if mammoth makes really juicy steak, that assures its success going forward, doesn't it?
Well, we did kill them in the first place, probably,
For juicy steaks.
for juicy steak.
So the cavemen said, this makes some good eating.
Or at least we killed some of them.
Big
There's
ribs.
evidence of that.
They were desperate.
Ross, did we kill all three of these animals here?
Yes and no.
Ross, that is
I have
not
a
an
question.
answer.
I have a question about this, which I want to ask my fellow panelists. It's about the day after, and by that I mean you bring back a mammoth mimic, or you make enough of them so that they can have some sort of expectation of being able to breed and continue their kind. How long does the interest stay there? At what point do you say, oh, well, it's just like bison, it's just another kind of steak that we can get if we want? I want to point out that in this country, in North America, there has been a de-extinction experiment going on for the past 500 years. Do you know about it? Horses, exactly. Horses used to live here. Horses very closely related to the living domestic horse. before it got into Asia. And how do we treat horses now? Horses that were responsible for making the western part of this country. They're excluded to Bureau of Land Management land. Each year it seems that the amount of range that they're able to utilize goes down because the ranchers don't like them, they interfere with the cows, the energy companies don't like them because they interfere with exploration. And my point in saying this is that the mammoth ant is going to be, in all probability, another 9 days wonder. So we've gone to all of this hand-wringing and work in labs in order to recreate or to create these animals that in effect never existed before, but then they just become part of the landscape. And that's my problem with all of this. It is that obligation that we're just ending up renouncing every time that we do this sort of thing. It's the same thing with introducing species into places that they ought not to be in. The goats in the Galapagos, the rodents and the cats and so forth, all over the world on the world's islands. They shouldn't be there. We're responsible for having done it. It has an effect on the flora and the fauna of these places. My feeling is that we have a continuing obligation to correct that to the degree possible, and that does not include making new things.
Correct it means restore it to what it was. Even though what it was very different from what it was 5,000 years ago.
Restoration in that sense is impossible, but make it easier at least for what's still there to persist. I think that's the point.
Hank, if there are members of Congress who are not sure that humans have anything to do with climate change, what hope do you have to introduce legislation that would need to be scientifically informed on all the matters that have been presented here today?
Introducing's easy.
Introducing
Getting passed
legislation.
is hard. It takes one to introduce. It takes a lot to pass. I think actually it is the broader framework that's going to do it, and it may be driven in large part by biosecurity fears, but also by environmentalist fears and agricultural fears. I don't see it happening in the next, shall we say, 2 to 4 years. So Congress basically responds to two sorts of things. There's a disaster, and then Congress immediately runs around saying, don't just stand there, do something. And so a disaster involving this could get some congressional legislation, and for that, it's useful to have something well thought out, prepared in advance, so when the moment strikes, you can put it in. And the other is a long negotiated period where the interest groups come together, and over 5 or 10 years, they cut deals. Either of those could happen with this. I think the national security and agricultural and environmental implications will push it, and de-extinction will be part of it, but only a small part of it.
Like you said, it's really kind of a sideshow.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating sideshow and a cool sideshow.
Okay, Hank just called your life's work a sideshow, just to be clear.
Right. Except what I argue, or tend to argue about this, is that this technology that one would need to develop to bring an extinct species back to life is the same technology that one needs to do what George has pointed out, which is to take a species that is alive today, but in danger of becoming extinct, and manipulate its genome to give it a better chance at staying alive. And this is the same. It's the same thing. It's a spectrum, much like species are, which is where we started.
So ways to apply the power that you have over life.
Ways to apply the power that we're trying to develop, the technology that doesn't really exist yet, that we would like to be able to develop as a way of manipulating the trajectory of life, much like we've been doing for at least the last 30,000 years when we first took a gray wolf and tried to make it into a dog that would warn us that our neighbors were coming.
Warn us that wolves would come. That's like got to be the most cruel thing we've ever done to an animal. Turn a wolf into something that warns us that wolves would be coming.
Yeah. Turn a wolf into a chihuahua.
Yeah, that's something. That's yeah, yeah. That's just.
There are many dogs that are doing very well out of that deal.
So what Beth is getting at is really an important moment, I think, in the debate about genetic modification. We've been concerned about, what you called it, the power over life. And genetic engineering has looked particularly frightening and upsetting to people because it has looked like we have this idea that the genes are, the book of life. It is the essence of the thing, and when you fiddle with that, you're getting into the organism at this almost sort of metaphysical level where you're really tweaking.
Yeah, but we've been doing that ever since there's been agriculture.
And so now we're beginning to think, and the whole conversation here has sort of operated on the assumption that, the genetic engineering is okay, but it's the larger concerns that Ross is putting out on the table about, and Beth just now, about systems and patterns. And, it's more holistic rather than this kind of concern about the...
Because maybe the future is not even about de-extinction or extinction. It's about just creating life that we want, right? You look at a wolf and say, I want a version of that fits on my lap.
Yeah,
And I can
you
feed
have that
biscuits
already.
too, right? And we just did that, right? And there are no herds of wild milk cows terrorizing the countryside. We invented the milk cow, right? So we're already doing this. Why wouldn't the future of this exercise simply be more of that?
Because there's too many of us. That is the fundamental problem. I want to say something about conservation.
You brought your family here tonight.
Yes, that's why the
But
clapping
because
was
there's
so
so
weird.
many of us, you don't want to do nothing as well.
Here's what you want to do from a conservation point of view, which is not to play God once again with the genetic endowments of species that you regard as endangered. What you want to do is have large portions of the Earth's surface dedicated to what lives there now. You want to keep the people out. You want to keep exploitation out, because that's the only way of going forward.
And how is that not
every time
quixotic
that
when
the-
Pleistocene Park is? I mean, that just seems to me to be incredibly naive. Like, how are you going to keep
You're calling me
people out?
quixotic when you want to turn Pleistocene
No,
Park?
she didn't call you quixotic.
she is.
She called you naive.
Oh.
Okay.
But quixotic is a good
distinction
word
without
for
a
it.
difference.
It is. And I said, how is that not quixotic when Pleistocene Park is? So I think that...
Do you think it's out of the question to have more of the Earth's surface and the oceans, for that matter, dedicated to preserving what's there now?
I do. I think that there's no way that we can do that. I think that there's very
And
little...
what is the fundamental reason for that?
Because we interact with every portion of this planet in some way, even if it's not by
Yeah,
touching
in simple,
the
it's because there's
surfaces.
too many of us.
But we're not going to
I'm
stop
68
that.
years old. When I was born, there was 2.5 billion people on the planet. In 2020, it's going to be somewhere on the order of 7.5 billion. That is 3 times in a single lifetime relative increase in the number of people on
Colonize
the
Mars. Yes.
planet. Start now, baby. So there has to be fundamentally, in all of this discussion, it becomes increasingly irrelevant, it seems to me, unless we're paying attention to the fact that people are everywhere, exploiting everything.
But to Beth's point, how in practice will you make that happen?
I'm not
'Cause
arguing that it's not a great idea.
Right,
I
right.
just think
She's not
it's,
saying, she's not art. She's just saying, she's recognizing who and what we are as a species and saying it's just not going to happen. Come up with some other idea.
Well,
we're going to
You just
continue to
gave us
turn...
one, which is a lot more feasible.
there is...
Or provide birth control information all over the planet like we used to do.
George, what?
In addition to Mars, there is a natural form of birth control, which is called cities. So the fecundity typically drops from around 7.5 children per family to 1.2 per family in the cities all over the world.
7.5.
Yeah. Why? On
I just-
average. I mean, you don't have a half a child. But
You'd have
No,
very
I know, but that
clean
wasn't my issue.
floorboards.
I just don't, it's been a while since I've met a family that had 8 kids. That's all.
But that's because I'm talking about not city kids, rural families where you need to have a certain number of children in order to
That was
sustain
back when the
farm.
kids died and they needed to get through
They
the...
still die, actually.
Yeah, oh, really?
Sadly, yes.
Okay.
So vitamin A deficiency kills about 1 million per year.
right.
Malaria kills about 1 million per year. And I could list a few more. In any case, when they move to the city, as soon as they move there, they don't wait until they're wealthy. They immediately change their expectations of family size. So that's one thing. And also in the city, they're denser. I mean, you still need the farmland. You could have more efficient farmland. That would be.
If people live vertically, then you leave room for farm.
You could just have more efficient farmland in general, and then you can free up some land for natural processes. You can use things that beef uses up 20 times as much farmland as vegetables do. There are all kinds of things you can do to free up land.
So Ross, you're complaining that we will soon have nearly 8 billion people, but as a biologist, I thought you would celebrate the fact that we're so successful as a species.
You did you? Okay.
Let's toast to 9 billion, right?
Right.
We need more
So
people.
we got to land this plane. Hank, you had a point before we try to bring closure here.
I think we've reached maybe what's going to be one of the most fundamental issues in environmental policy and environmental ethics, and that is, do we have to become gardeners of the world, or can we be park rangers? Can we be stewards and preservers of what is here, or do we actually have to be farmers who plant and reap and weed and do all those other things?
Edit genes.
And yes, and in a world where, what's here today is so vastly different from what was here 10,000, 20,000, 30 years ago, and some significant part, although Ross and I can argue about how much, is due to human intervention. The world is, I think, out of balance because of what we've done. It is not a stable ecosystem. Can we just let it alone and hope that it returns to something stable and good? Or do we need to be gardeners?
Right. Biologists on the panel, correct me if I'm wrong, the ecosystem is hardly ever actually stable.
Right.
There's always something out of whack. Why do you have locusts and frogs and
But sometimes it's more out of whack than others.
Okay.
Yeah?
You want
The
the less
locusts
out of
don't
whack
think
time.
they're out of whack when they're having a population explosion.
Right.
They're loving it. Yeah.
So I gotta land this plane. So Ross, you want to create huge areas of reserve? We kind of do that. We have national parks. There's Kruger Park in South Africa. There are places that we know we want to keep the way they are. So it's not completely out of the question as a goal, but what's the most realistic you can be as a hope for the future? Don't be utopian on me, just be realistic.
Okay, I'll just be naive. Well,
I'm going to pay
let's
for that.
let's look at what happened in Chile just 2 weeks ago. Something like 2 million acres given over to the Chilean people, to the government, by the former owner of Patagonia. I mean, the store. Now, there was a person, I'm sorry, I'm not recollecting the name, but he and his wife, Tompkins, right? Very committed to preserving natural spaces on the planet, to the extent that they bought up a very large part of Chilean Patagonia, relatively speaking, and it's now been deeded back to the country, but as a park. That's what it's going to be. You can make the argument, well, is it really going to be preserved in the proper kind of way? I can't answer that. But you must have some expectation that there's right-thinking people in all parts of the planet. And if there is the kind of capital and the kind of interest in doing this sort of thing, then why can't it happen on many kinds of scales all over the planet? Maybe that's our obligation, that it's not to individual species, it's to ecosystems, it's to areas.
In fact, there's
where
a
the
movement
diversity
now.
lives.
There's a movement now where they're trying to do that with regions of the ocean that'll be protected
Precisely.
from fishing.
Precisely, and that is not a thought, and this is my real point here, that is not a thought that existed, I would argue, even 10 years ago. Maybe among conservation biologists it did, but it was not part of the conversation. Now we hear about it, and we think, well, what a good idea. If it can be done, why not do it?
All right, George, first, before I get you to make some kind of summative remark, what's the next creature that's going to crawl out of your lab? What?
So one that's already crawling out are
I was just joking.
yeah.
Okay, so you have a real
You're
answer
gonna
to
get-
that question.
You're gonna get a confession out of me anyway. So pigs that are potential organ donors. So there's you can engineer them so that they are immune compatible and that they are virus free, which was one of the reasons the FDA shut down this idea in 1997. We've now made them virus free and hopefully immune compatible, and they seem to be developing normally. So
And pigs' organs are approximately the same size and,
the same
and definitely
size.
the same function as human organs.
Yes, and certain parts like the valves are already used, but they're not alive. These would be alive in complex organs, kidneys, liver, heart.
And to anyone who'd say, well, what about the pig? And I'm saying, we eat pigs, right? So,
Yes, we eat billions of pigs, and this would only be 1 million per year.
thought this through. Wow. So, Greg, does George suffer from moral turpitude?
Actually, George and a number of other synthetic biologists are to be commended for being very open about the work that they're doing and encouraging public thinking about it, appearing on panels like this and writing. There was a paper came out of George's lab just a week ago about sheafs, synthetic human entities with embryo-like features, which you describe as a kind of synthetic biology, interestingly.
Yes.
But they published this, I think, in order to launch discussion about it.
Conversation.
Yeah. So, and that's what we need. Unfortunately, no one really quite knows how to have a society-wide public discussion about these things that can converge on some kind of conclusion. But we need to have the kind of thinking. And George and Drew Endy and Kevin Esfelt and a bunch of others in the field and associated with your lab have been pretty good about that.
So, is it possible that your moral compass can adjust depending on what you've learned in what happens in labs over the years? I mean, what's your flexibility here?
Well, probably too flexible. I tend to, I feel very strongly that the technology is, exciting and frightening, and we need to.
As any frontier technology is.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And we need to work it through case by case. This isn't a sort of an all or nothing. Whenever we begin to talk about these things, we tend to make these sort of all or nothing. Mm-hmm. Nature's all over here. It's all humanized. It's all, any kind of genetic engineering is bad. That's not where I am on this. And so, yeah, I think we need to consider these technologies in classes, and then within the classes, often, particular cases, like gene drives to eliminate malaria-carrying mosquitoes and stuff like that. Have to go into the weeds and think about it.
Beth, is your next book to how to clone some other animal? Do you have a ranking of
Most important to
most
least
important to least important creatures you want to clone?
No, it's not. No. The How to Clone a Mammoth book isn't really about cloning mammoths. It is a step-by-step manual, but really it outlines the technical and ethical and ecological challenges associated with bringing anything back to life. But no one's really interested in anything except dinosaurs, and then when they find out you can't do dinosaurs, it's mammoths. My next book is thinking about how we as a species have been interacting with the world around us since we evolved from our ancestor hominins, and how the present technology kind of fits into that. Is it a logical extension of what we've been doing from domestication and agriculture and building cities and dams, or is it something that is new and different? And that's what I explore.
Hank, we didn't flesh out the idea earlier, but I was kind of thinking that legislation typically follows what people then recognize as a problem that needs to be contained rather than coming at ahead of time. The future of this, where does it land legally, do you see? Will they have freedoms, or is it all going to be constrained because people are scared, and half of people who are scared because they don't actually understand what's going on?
It depends. But
lawyer.
as a law professor, I tell my students that every legal question you answer, that your answer should start with "it depends," because it always does. And I actually
thank you.
thought that's what
Okay.
Greg was saying earlier about de-extinction. It depends on the circumstance. But in terms of your political question, it depends on how well the stage is set. It depends on what brings it to a head. It depends on how many people have some idea of the pluses and minuses of this and the sophistication of it. And you've just added 900 people to that list, for which I thank you.
I would bet your biggest challenge will be the bioliteracy of people who are voting on what those laws should be.
You know, interestingly, it will both be the people who are most opposed tend to know the least biology, but also a fair number who know a fair amount of biology are significantly opposed. You can't do pro-science, anti-science based solely on science knowledge, which is a little frustrating to me, but that's what the polls show.
So, my last question, and then we're going to go to your questions from the audience. So, this is 2017. Let's say 2050. What does the world look like from your 2050? What does it look like? Is it going to be a mammoth park?
Well, I'll probably be dead.
Okay. Okay. Next.
But I am pretty confident that some things will have been created that will be claimed to be the revivals of extinct species. I'm even more confident that there'll be more synthetic biology out there walking around. Some of it will be in farms, some of it will be in forests, some of it will be in our houses as pets, and we will have muddled through. We're pretty good at muddling through.
Beth, you going to make a zoo?
No, I don't think the intention of any of this is to make a zoo.
So in 2050, what does the world look like?
There will either be a lot more of us or a lot fewer of us.
Whoa.
I don't think it's likely to be the same as it is today.
That's completely spooky, actually.
I don't know. I tend to be hopeful. I think that we have a lot of people who genuinely care about the problems that we're facing in the world, and a lot of people who don't. And your question about the biggest hurdle to Hank, I think the answer really is that the biggest hurdle is going to be getting people to care. I think that extinction, in as much as extinction doesn't affect people personally, most people just don't care. The idea that we're going to bring species back to life isn't going to make people care more or less about causing extinctions, because most people don't care. But hopefully we will find ourselves in a world where maybe because
On a panel that reaches 1,000 people. Yeah.
These people obviously care, they wouldn't be here. This is not the right audience.
Right.
But hopefully we'll find ourselves, perhaps because of some disaster, in a world where people are forced to and end up caring more.
So Greg, is there a bit of moral philosophy that you think is absent in the population that you carry, that you would then have to lead, so that we're ready for what comes out of George's lab?
A bit of moral philosophy that's absent in the population.
It's because you have to study it professionally, academically. That means it's not what the rest of us have.
No. I don't think that at all. No, one of the sort of unsettling things about being an ethicist or a bioethicist is that you sometimes seem to be putting yourself forward as having sort of like inside knowledge about what's right and wrong, or some sort of inside track on how to figure it out. And that's not the case if you think of morality as, coming out of the culture. We're all ethicists here. We're all charged with thinking about it and working through these things.
So you went to school for no reason. we all have it. George, what's down the pike in 2050? You'll either be a hero or you'll be in jail, is what I'm thinking.
I think I'm trying to be very responsive and hopefully stay ahead of, help have discussions like this so that we know what is needed, what is possible, well in advance.
And as an astrophysicist, I just simply didn't know, thanks for calling it to my attention, that you're into some frontier activities that could be received in multiple ways, and you're very open about that. And that's a model for all scientists who are working on things, that you know would require and you would expect public participation in how that should go in the future. So I was very pleased to learn that about you.
Yeah, and I think large subsets of many different professions and citizens can be engaged. And it's not as if there aren't, it's not like there's some giant loophole here. To introduce a wild species that's been engineered requires approval from 3 agencies, the FDA, the EPA, and the USDA. And animal welfare is one of the top priorities for at least 2 of those. So, you know, we're going to see many more engineered organisms, microbes, plants, and animals. Many of them now will probably be classified as fairly close to natural. They're not transgenics, where you're moving it from one species to another, which is really kind of the dividing line for organic foods, say. They will be cisgenic, that is to say, they're very subtle changes where you just knock out a gene or re-regulate it. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot of that. There's 30 different foods already that are classified as unregulated by the USDA because they're so close to natural, but they are heavily engineered, much more clearly engineered than just irradiating them and hoping for the best.
So Ross, I just give you the last thought here, because you've been the most contemplative of us this evening.
Indeed.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, you're not going to give me a lead-in.
No. Okay.
So we've been talking about mega mammals, and we've been talking about passenger pigeons and all of these sorts of things, right? These are all vertebrates. But in any ecosystem, the organisms that have all the tough jobs are microorganisms, as George was just implying. And what I would like to see, if I'm still here at 2050, which is unlikely, but nevertheless, you'll tell me, that all of the effort, or a lot of the effort, ought to go into things like doctoring microorganisms so that they do the jobs that are really, really important. So for example, bacteria that produce something that amounts to a combustible type of material, a fuel. So we don't have to frack, so we don't have to drill, so we don't have to do all of these kinds of things.
And that would have huge economic consequences. Good incentive to go there, all right?
Microorganisms that produce food. I'm not talking Soylent Green. What I'm talking about are alternatives to meat, as a great example. It was mentioned here earlier, I think by George, in fact.
There's 6 vegetarians in the audience in this section.
For good reason. The amount of land that goes into housing cattle and the amount of methane that they're burping out, right? These are not things we need on the planet anymore. So if there is a future to synthetic biology, there certainly is, I would think that for economic reasons, for social reasons, for all the important reasons, that it moves in that kind of direction to make lives better by making it less dependent on the natural world and more on our own inventiveness.
Ross, thanks for those concluding. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking our panel. If you can hang for like 5 or 10 minutes, I count this Q&A session as a fundamental part of our time together. And we've got a microphone set up right here and right here. And I haven't forgotten about you guys upstairs, so I'll find one of you in the middle of this. Let's start right here. Yes, go ahead.
Hello?
Right here.
Yes.
Yes. Can you see where my hand is pointing? Right here. Yes, go.
Okay, so during this entire speech about de-extinction, we talk a lot about the technologies used. So imagine if, like, every human right now dies, and then a new species comes to become the dominant technological species on Earth here. Do you think we deserve to be de-extincted if they ever found out about us?
Good question. Greg, why don't you take that?
Because, like,
Yeah, we understand the full
I would
implications
love
of
to
that.
be de-extincted, yes. But there's a bit about the memories. Yeah.
Yeah, so should humans be de-extincted by a future civilization who may be intrigued by us? And they'll de-extinct us and then put us in a zoo, won't they?
Pleistocene Park, please.
Homo ignoramus.
Homo ignoramus, yeah. Should we be de-extincted?
Should we be de-extincted? Oh my goodness.
Oh, you stumped a philosopher. Okay,
Yeah, I don't know how to say it.
Do you think we should bring back Neanderthals?
Ooh, Neanderthal. Should we bring back Neanderthal? We've got Neanderthal DNA, right?
We do.
Yeah.
Wait. Are you there?
Yes. The problem with de-extincting a sentient creature like us or Neanderthals is that they would be stuck in the zoo. And now, and it would be almost certainly extremely frightening and scary and lonely. The animal welfare concerns just get overwhelming. So when I first heard your question, I was envisioning bringing an entire population back through some, I don't know, vast powers that this species has 150 years from now, when we have a whole human population just like that, living
Do we
cities.
deserve it?
Do we deserve it? Do we deserve to be brought back?
George wants to be brought back, so he thinks he deserves it, yes.
I don't know if I deserve it.
Yeah, I don't know about deserve.
I would say that in your comment, you valued primates above some threshold as being sentient and then no other animals with that criterion. But people who own pigs would certainly say they're sentient.
Yeah. I didn't, you're right.
You own a pig? Did someone? This is Manhattan. But let's keep the questions going. Yes, what do you have here?
Yeah, actually, I think your last question pretty much bordered on what I was going to ask. But I was going to say, imagine being the last human being on Earth or being abducted by aliens. And then you would see, for the sake of perspective, the eyes through the world of an animal brought back from extinction, unique and special, but alone in the world.
Right.
So what kind of life would this innocent animal lead without peers to look back upon it, or without nature or even nurture? And what kind of useful information would they even add to the world without that, or would they even gain from it without having friends?
Yeah, so that would make an interesting movie plot, I would think. You just got brought back from extinction. What does the world look like to you? It's got to be pretty weird. Or maybe you don't even care, it's just the world and you try to adapt to it. Is that, Beth?
I don't think there's anyone who's really seriously thinking about this who believes that they should bring one thing back and have it there. I mean, I think the goal, as George has said and as I've said, is to create populations of things that can survive and sustain themselves.
They will want to
in the
mate, I
world.
think is what she's saying.
Or the idea to use genetic engineering technology to tweak species that are still alive to allow them to be able to survive and increase their diversity. I think, yes, the animal welfare issue is paramount. I mean, obviously I don't think there's anybody sitting on this panel who would want to bring something back just to make it suffer. And I think that's probably a fair thing to say about everyone. So.
Let's go here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, how you doing?
Today you talk about two things. You talk about parks and preserving parks and pockets of parks, but you didn't talk a little bit about migration corridors and how ecosystems in these parks could actually disappear if these aren't interconnected. And the second thing, if species that are on the brink of extinction, you create them, breed them, or whatever, has there been any thought given to, if there's a reintroduction, the institutional knowledge that these animals have to have? Are they actually the same species? The elephant that knows where the watering hole is when there's a drought, where she hasn't been there in 50 years. How is that going to be the same animal?
I love that question. Yeah. Beth, why don't you take that?
The corridors question, the first part of the question, I think is really important. What we see when we study these populations of animals as they were going extinct, so we can get DNA from these animals starting 50,000 years ago and move toward the present day, is that as the populations decline, they become geographically isolated from each other. You start seeing a loss of diversity and then these tiny little populations that are then threatened. And probably this is because of a loss of a corridor. Animals need to be able to move. This is one of the things that we have done, people have done to the world that's been, I think, the most damning for these animals, is create dams, build cities, make highways, block these animals from being able to move across these corridors and interact with each other. And absolutely.
So we made the Earth our corridor.
We made it our corridor at the expense of everything else that was there.
At the expense of others. And how about the environmental memory that is embedded in a species?
Yeah,
so if you know where the watering hole or what other species to avoid because they might eat you, if you bring a species back from extinction, are those memories part of what you have just de-extincted?
Or a saved species, either one.
You can create memories. For example, in salmon, if you put them in a particular location, then they will learn that that's the new route to get to the from the ocean back to their breeding grounds.
But you're right.
That has been done.
When there are captive breeding projects that happen, there are some species, and within some species there are some memories that are genetically encoded that you see that they can do, and there are other things that they can't do, and these are things that will be lost. But as George says, they might be taught, and if they can't be taught, then they'll be learned. I mean, species have an overwhelming desire to stay alive and reproduce. This is why
to not die.
Exactly.
Yes, that's
To
life.
not die.
A true cool example of this was, I think it was sandhill cranes, but it was a crane population that had been moved, and they actually used humans in ultralight planes guiding the cranes to their appropriate migration.
The cranes thought that the ultralight planes were other cranes?
Yeah. Maybe they weren't the brightest cranes on the planet.
I just, makes you wonder if we get de-extincted, how are they going to, what are they going to use to fool us, Let's try over here, yes, sir.
Ross, your comments at the end triggered a thought. I don't know how many of you in the panel remember early film of Alec Guinness called The Man in the White Suit. In The Man in the White Suit, he was a chemist who came up with an indestructible fabric and made suits out of it. And for a while he was a hero, but then he became a pariah because people started losing jobs, and it's sort of very much against the nature of the population. And, greed takes over also. So we're living in an era of anti-science. So I'm going back to your comment, and I'm thinking about it from a practical point of view. Not that I don't agree with you. I think it'd be a wonderful thing.
Well, just a quick point. An indestructible suit, does that mean it's bulletproof, or does that mean it never wears out?
Never wore out.
Okay, so that's why. No, we've got that problem solved. It's called fashion. So that indestructible suit will go out of style, and then you put it away and you buy another suit, and that keeps people employed.
You're missing my point. My point is not the suit. My point is.
So I got distracted.
You're creating
You're right.
a situation that is contrary to what population generally agrees with.
It's an unintended consequence, right? Ross?
Yeah, I'm not entirely clear, sir. You mean using microorganisms to produce our food?
Right. And all of that, yeah.
As opposed to agribusiness, like we have in this country now?
Farms to farming, or if you use it to create fuel, what will happen to petroleum and the other industry? You'll get enormous blowback, I guess. That's what I'm driving at.
Unless that creates such a huge industry that it can employ everyone who would otherwise lose their job if they're properly trained for it. So
this is like coal in America. Yeah. Coal ain't coming back. The only way coal is ever going to be an important constituent of our fossil fuel sources if somebody really learns how to make it clean. You may have heard the recent announcement that we're going to have very clean coal.
Very clean.
We're not. Not with any existing technology. It is just simply a bad idea. But what happens with technology is, and I think we're going to agree on this, you see a need, you put brain power against it, and one hopes over time that you develop something that really does make a difference, that propels the new technology. And my view is that we really are at that point when it comes to food technology at this point in human existence. You do not need to put very large parts of the planet under tillage or supporting animals in the way that we're doing right now. It's really the only way forward if populations are going, human populations that is, are going to continue to burgeon. So the man in the white suit analogy is true for his white suit. I'm assuming it was a white suit. But it doesn't mean that the technology is just going to stop there. One hopes that with further insights and obviously experimentation and trying to do the absolute best one can with the materials at hand, that it's going to be an upward trajectory, like technology's been for the past several centuries.
I would also say that something that surprised me when I looked at the numbers, we had horses as a fundamental part of our civilization for thousands of years. And then over a 20-year period, from like 1900 to 1920, horses in the civilized world basically went out of business. The buggy whip, you couldn't sell it. The horse-drawn carriage becomes a novelty rather than a fundamental part of your life. Cars took over, and that happened basically in the snap of a finger on a historical timeline. So such changes can happen, putting whole industries out of business, embracing new ones if the value of the new one is clear and present. So I see there be a mixture of where there'll be blowback and where people will just completely embrace the change. We have time for just like a couple, just a few more. We got a kid online. Can you just come forward? Just come forward. Yeah, no, I mean, to the microphone here. Oh, you can, oh, yeah. Oh, you go ahead, come on, come here. Here, how you doing? How old are you? You're 9. You're 9?
Yes.
So I was 9 years old when I first came to this museum. And my parents took me into the planetarium. And I was starstruck. Yeah, that actually happened to me. So you have a question. Why don't you face everyone and say the question into your mic. Turn around.
Beth talked about bringing back mammals. So if we did that, wouldn't we care less about them? Like, she said caring about them more. So if we brought them back, wouldn't we care less?
I like that question because what would happen is they're kind of intriguing now because they're rare, or in fact they don't exist. But now you bring them back and then they're just another animal in nature, and then their novelty wears off. So what's up with that?
I think this actually goes to what Ross was talking about, where he said that one thing that we really do have to remember is that if we do this, if we do eventually have the technology to do this, and we've thought through the ethics, and we've thought through the ecological implications of doing it, and we bring them back, that we really then have a responsibility to make sure that we protect and care about and preserve the species that we have. And Ross brought this up.
Yeah, but without the novelty, where does the caring come from?
Well, it has to come from us, which is why I think it's fundamentally important that we somehow convince people that extinction is bad, that things other than humans are valuable, that having a diverse society, a biologically diverse society, meaning many different species of many different organisms living in ecosystems that are healthy and robust, is a fundamental value that adds to our lives. And this is hard. So you're going to help us, right?
I don't think.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
I don't think novelty wears off. I mean, necessarily, like dogs. We still love dogs, and they're not novel anymore. But we like the ancient breeds just as much as we like the new ones.
The wolves are still pissed off what we did with their DNA. Yeah. I've asked them.
Fair enough.
I want to take, excuse me for everyone online, but I'm only going to take 2 more questions just because we're running long here. Right over there, yes, go ahead.
Okay. I have one. I'm a non-scientist, but I was interested in the international questions going forward, not looking back. But one was about Casper-9 technology, which obviously is already internationally understood and progressing. And I don't see how you can wrap national security around that. And the other is about microbiodiversity and immunology and human resilience, and we also all share in that going forward, and what you think about those two issues.
Hank, is that you?
Sure. I think the international issues are extraordinarily difficult here. We have tried very hard to keep other countries from getting nuclear weapons. There's a treaty signed by almost every country in the world. Making nuclear weapons is incredibly expensive, difficult, and time-consuming, and countries have done it. Making CRISPRed organisms is cheap and easy and getting cheaper and easier. There's no way we're going to be able to do a completely successful international control over this.
Just by contrast, if
we'll
I
have
can
to
say,
do the best we can.
If you're going to purify plutonium
Yeah.
or uranium, it takes huge facilities.
Right.
But what you're doing, George, is in a lab.
You can get a kit for $150.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Basically, it takes well, I'm in New York, so forgive me, a garage.
Yeah, a garage.
But a garage-sized space and a couple $1,000s, and you can start doing this. So the international regulation is going to be really hard, and we're not going to be perfect at it. That's been true for a while with biological warfare, which is a lot easier than nukes. What we've done isn't perfect, but it's better than not doing anything. And I think that's the world we're going to be living in, one where we can't guarantee security either from biological warfare or from mistakes, from accidents that happen because of bioengineering, but one where we're watching out closely to see whether those happen or not. So better diagnosis, better monitoring is crucial. We've got some plans for how we may fix things, and we're staying alert. So that's, I wish I had a better answer, but I think that's the best we can do. I hope we can get that good.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has to be the last question. Yeah, hey.
Is this thing, yeah. Okay, one for you, Dr. Tyson. You got a new book coming out in about a month. You're going to be doing a talk here as part of your book tour?
Oh, no, actually. I'll be over at the 92nd Street Y doing the book talk there.
Okay, now for the panel.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, if it eventually gets easy to bring back a extinct species, wouldn't that cause people to be less concerned about species going extinct that already exist? Because, we'll ever bring them back whenever we want to. It'll let people less interested in preserving what we have because they could be brought back later on.
Yes.
It could, but it could also do the opposite, which is that if you're told by your general that we're fighting a losing battle, every few months another species goes, let's just hang in there. It's a very different conversation than if you say, we can win on occasion. Right. I think that's a different conversation. It can really mobilize and motivate whole new sources of whole new resources. But we shouldn't neglect the argument that you just mentioned, which is if we show how expensive it is to bring back a species, then that might be an economic argument against letting them go extinct in the first place.
I'm waiting for senators from Oklahoma to make this very argument the next time the Endangered Species Act comes up. But one potential saving grace to de-extinction research, the worst thing in the world would be they think we can bring things back, and so therefore we can go ahead and let them go extinct, but we can't. And there's been enough talk and enough hype about biotechnology in general that I think people believe we can do things that right now we can't. The worst situation would be to do that and not being able to bring them back. Being able to bring them back provides at least some safety valve, but we should always stress the importance of keeping things from going extinct first. That's a heck of a lot easier than trying to bring them back is going to be.
If I can offer some summative remarks, and I don't mean to sound like Ross in some of these comments, but I think I will.
Is that a bad thing?
No, yeah. So I do a lot of reading on sort of the history of science and its relationship to countries, nations, and civilization. And one of the things people do first is weaponize it. This has been with us from the beginning. In 1940, a new element was discovered that fit on the periodic table right after neptunium, and this was 10 years after the cosmic object known as Pluto was discovered. So this element was named in honor of that cosmic object, plutonium. Within 5 years, we had weaponized it. And plutonium was the bomb that was tested in Alamogordo. It was not the uranium bomb, it was the plutonium bomb. This is what countries do. And the United States did not invent war. It goes back as long as we've had history. So my concern, my hope, because I'm not in this, you guys are, is that we as a species, as nations, as a civilization, that we have the wisdom of how to harness this for good, for the good, for the greater good, for longevity, for health, for happiness, for food, whatever it is, that the urge to do good with it will be greater than the urge to do bad with it. And I worry on occasion that we don't have the wisdom to do that. And in which case, in the future, there'll either be very many more of us or very many fewer of us, but it certainly won't be the same. All of you, thank you for coming to this. And thanks again for our brilliant panel.